Honestly, I don't know even where to begin. Hi guys, Matthew here and welcome back again to my channel. So I actually had a plan to do separate reviews of these two cards as they were coming in, but well, let's just say I had a teeny tiny mishap of losing all data of one of my 3 SSDs. Coincidentally, that one was filled with the project files for the Sapphire RX 5600 XT Pulse review. What's even more funny or sad is that it actually happened while I was rendering out that same video. It's not all bad news because I only lost that ongoing project, as I have everything else backed up. Plus, I still do have the video files of the Sapphire's graphics card on my camera's SD memory card and its benchmarks, so it's not that terrible, but I did lost about 2 days of work putting that all together. Anyhow, where one door closes, another one opens up, and in the meantime I got the Gigabyte RX 5600 XT gaming OC model, so why just not compare them? And that is what I'm going to do. Since some time has passed after the initial launch of AMD's RX 5600 XT, I had some time to reflect on the whole launch of this series, which had a few interesting turnarounds to say at least. Long story short, Nvidia decided to dump the price of their RTX 2060 series just before the release of the RX 5600 XT series, so they can compete with it price and performance wise, onto which AMD responded by releasing a new BIOS update that significantly raised the GPU and memory clock speeds. But there is a twist in this too, as not all cards will actually receive those new clocks. I'll talk about that later on. All of that actually happened right before the launch, so it ended up being a bit of a mess, since reviewers had to redo all the tests basically moments prior to the release, which also created a certain level of confusion among users, because they weren't sure what exactly are they going to get. And by that, I mean two things. First one is that some cards were already shipped to retailers with the original BIOS, one with the lower clocks, so some users will have to manually update their BIOS to the latest one, which is not a big deal. For example, Sapphire has a really straightforward guide and a one-click solution, but still, for some buyers out there, that will be inconvenient, because maybe they don't feel comfortable doing it. The second thing is the fact that not all manufacturers are going to update their video memory speeds from 12 to 14 gigabits per second, because they cannot vouch that the memory will be perfectly stable, since it either didn't undergo their strict quality control standards for that higher clock scenario, or they know that they didn't use a higher quality video memory chips that could without a problem withstand those speeds. Although most of the cards probably wouldn't have any problem with being bumped up to that video memory speed, it seems like some manufacturers didn't want to take any chance, potentially causing user stability issues, even if it was for 1% of them. This issue of course generated an outcome which doesn't go in anyone's favor, and these two cards are the perfect example of that. Why, you ask? Well, Sapphire's RX 5600 XT Pulse model video memory runs at 14 gigabits per second, while the Gigabyte one runs at 12 gigabits per second, so now we have this discrepancy where in theory we shouldn't, as it was intended to be a one product without any variations. Gigabyte also still has old specifications listed for this model on their website, so on top of all of that, that's an additional factor that can confuse some users. But actually, that's not the whole story. The most confusing part is about to come. You probably saw others reviewing this particular Gigabyte's gaming OC model at 14 gigabits per second of video memory speed, so why does my sample has 12 gigabits per second of video memory speed, but with the new updated GPU clocks? That's a good question, and honestly I don't know the answer to it, because I don't have anyone from Gigabyte to communicate with me on that. There is a BIOS update on their website which states that it bumps up the video memory speed to 14 gigabits per second, but this particular BIOS on my card sample is also the newer official one, which was received from Gigabyte prior to the launch, and as I mentioned, it has the updated GPU clocks, but it doesn't have the bumped up video memory speed too. It was just left at 12 gigabits per second. Also, there's another BIOS update which quote-unquote improves stability, lowers down the total graphics power of the card, which maybe indicates again some retroactive changes to the memory, but they didn't say anything about the clocks here. Since this is not my sample but rather one from a colleague, I didn't want to fiddle with reflashing the BIOS again. Before all, as there are a few different BIOS versions for different card versions, this one is the revision 1.0, so my guess is that maybe ones have better bin memory than others, which Gigabyte's internal quality control would approve running at 14 gigabits per second. In the end, I've decided to leave it at 12 gigabits per second, just so you can see what kind of difference does the faster 14 gigabits per second video memory makes, while for all of you out there who are wondering what kind of performance would a 14 gigabits per second RX 5600 XT gaming OC model have, well, basically the same as Sapphire's model within a margin of an error. And again, all of this can be easily fixed just by doing some overclocking. Putting that aside, with the hope that this will resolve itself with time, let's check out what this series actually offers. What's most interesting about it is that it's basically a RX 5700 series card in disguise. Although you would think that on account of its naming scheme, it would stand somewhere in the middle of the RX 5500 XT and the RX 5700 series, the RX 5600 XT series is actually far apart from the RX 5500 XT series and sits right next to the RX 5700 series, like really close to it. So close that its GPU is spec per spec the same, the amount of shaders, texture units and ROPs, and where the difference comes from is in the amount of video memory, 6GB instead of 8GB, and width of the memory bus, 192-bit instead of 256-bit, which lower down the video memory bandwidth of the RX 5600 XT series. Since these changes are not enough to make a bigger impact on the performance, AMD decided to clock down the RX 5600 XT GPU. Originally it was far lower, but now with the BIOS update it hangs just above the 1700 MHz mark under load, but it's more than obvious that they have a decent amount of headroom to play with, especially now knowing what they've done in the midst of this launch, together with the fact that they're locking down the core clocks when you go in and try to do some overclocking, so it seems that they have a pretty consistent quality of their chips, which they can just scale up or down as needed. Taking a closer look at these two particular models, I see some familiar faces. I already had a chance to check out two models coming from Pulse series and based on the current generation of AMD's Navi GPUs, while I also had a chance to check out few versions of Gigabyte's gaming series, both with Nvidia's and AMD's GPUs. Feel free to check that out in the right top corner of this video. With that said, both of the cards look decent, nothing special about their aesthetic design. The Pulse one is a little bit more edgy with these red details, which I personally don't prefer, to be honest. They kind of feel unnecessary, while the Gigabyte's card is just plain black with some hints of silver. Crossing over to the back side of it, this team continues on with the backplate, which is thankfully metal. Gigabyte actually started using plastic covers on their lower tier models, while with the Sapphire's model, which also has a metal backplate, we have a little bit more going on here, a lot of graphics, colors and cutouts. To no one's surprise, both of the cards have same video output setup, one HDMI and 3 display ports. What's also the same is their PCI Express power configuration, where we have one 8-pin PCI Express power connector. They also carry some LED lighting on the side, lighting up their logo, but Gigabyte here takes the win, if you will, since it has RGB LEDs, while Sapphire only has red LEDs. On the other hand, Sapphire does have a dual BIOS switch. The other BIOS switch it carries is the silent profile, although to be honest, it's not like you're going to use it, especially since these are low TDP GPUs to begin with. Finally, what makes them obviously different from each other is their cooling solutions. With Gigabyte's model we have a 4 copper heat pipes configuration running through the 3-part aluminum heatsink, while Sapphire's Pulse model has a single piece aluminum heatsink with 3 nickel-plated copper heat pipes going through the fins of it and coming to the copper GPU base. They both have additional cooling solutions for the VRMs and video memory in a form of cold plates, which make direct contact with them and the heatsink, pulling the heat off of them and being additionally cooled by the fans. Speaking of that, both of course have the fan stop technology and their idle temperatures are pretty much the same as you can see it here. The cooling setup keeps their GPU temperature at around 40 degrees Celsius in this passive state, with the hotspot being a bit higher on Gigabyte's model. When the thing started to heat up, Sapphire's RX 5600 XT ended up mostly having lower GPU hotspot, memory and VRM temperatures, although in some scenarios they had pretty similar results, but in that case Gigabyte's 3 80mm fans were ramping up higher than average, while Sapphire's 2 95mm fans were always running at 800 to 1000 RPM at most. With this in mind, Gigabyte's card runs just a tad louder during load. The fans are spinning anywhere from 1000 to 1300 RPM, but it almost wasn't a fair fight since it's really hard to beat that Sapphire's fan speed. What again bothers me a bit is Gigabyte's fan tuning. The fan speed moves around constantly, they don't ease into fan speed change, plus those changes come on a small and frequent scale, instead of using some kind of median, but thankfully with this model it's a little bit less pronounced. Here's a short sound clip of the fans with the cards being under full load, while also showing you the sound meter for a measurement comparison. Before I jump over to benchmarking results, let's first take a look at some of my gameplay footage with these two cards. I will put them side by side. You can see the live performance figures of each of them in the left top corner of their screens. You can also find my setup, which I used here to test out these two GPUs, in the description box down below. And if you have any questions about them, feel free to leave them in the comment section down below and I will try to help you out.
Wait for my signal. Rebel command.
Taking a look at the results, Sapphire's model obviously brings in a bit more performance on account of the video memory clock being higher, which in some synthetic benchmarks stands out even more than what's to be expected. And this in itself is the 12 versus 14 gigabits per second video memory speed comparison. That is what you will get if you end up with a model that has lower video memory clock, mostly in between 2 to 7% of performance difference. Overall, when it comes to the RX 5600 XT series itself, it proved to have enough power to deliver performance worthy of 1440p gaming at high graphic settings, even when it comes to high refresh rate monitors in some games, more so if you have a 1080p monitor, where it easily pumps out way above 100 FPS. 4K is doable, but don't count on crossing 60 FPS mark in more demanding titles. Again, I wouldn't be too stuck onto their performance in this particular case, since this can easily be leveled up with manual overclocking if you ever wish to, which is why I don't look at the performance as end-all be-all when comparing cards coming from a same series, but from a different manufacturer. I know that their performance will be in a margin of an error, even if for some reason it's not, like in this case, but that's not a big deal, you can always overclock them further. Speaking of overclocking, as you can see it here in MSI's Afterburner, both of the cards managed to achieve basically same results in this area, 1820 MHz for the GPU clock speed, that's the limit which was preset, which in practice resulted in them ramping to just a bit below 1800 MHz. I also pulled down the voltage and power limit a bit, which resulted in even lower temperatures, which suited Gigabyte's card a bit more. The video memory was also maxed out at 1860 MHz, as far as it can go, just pull those sliders all the way to the right, once again proving that this isn't a big issue if you really want to have that 14 gigabits per second video memory speed, even above that, with Gigabyte's card. Feel free to use these settings for your GPU. If it's not working out for you, if it keeps freezing or crashing, just lower down the clocks step by step until you're in the clear and fully stable. So, if you really end up with a 12 gigabit per second video memory version of a certain model, instead of flashing card's BIOS, just open up MSI's Afterburner or other overclocking utility and fix that problem within few seconds time. This basically puts both of the cards on the same level performance-wise, and overall you can expect around 5 to 10% of performance gain with doing so. Taking a look at the power consumption, the numbers from the GPU-Z are telling us that's around 110 watts during gaming for Gigabyte's card, while for Sapphire it's more around 110 to 120 watts. The difference in power consumption could be due to faster memory speed or it has a higher power limit, but most importantly, Sapphire's GPU runs at 0.01 to 0.02 volts higher than Gigabyte's. If we subtract system idle power consumption from the Firmax GPU stress test load, where only the GPU is doing the work, the consumption from the wall is around 165 watts for Gigabyte's and 180 watts for Sapphire's card, so the difference here is even a bit higher on the Sapphire's end, as its GPU voltage goes to 0.975 volts. Take these power consumption and temperature figures with a little bit of grain of salt in terms of Gigabyte's model, since maybe this BIOS version that I have here won't be comparable with other versions. So, what's my conclusion? With everything shown here, when we take the performance difference out of the account, since this is a particular scenario in question, Sapphire's RX 5600 XT Pulse still ends up being a bit quieter and cooler. Gigabyte's RX 5600 XT gaming OC model will have a bit of a problem fighting this off, especially since it's priced higher, at least here in Europe. When it comes to the series itself in general, the RX 5600 XT overall seems like a really good buy, a mainstream card that can handle anything you throw at it. The only thing I resent it a bit is that it's so close to the RX 5700 series price-wise that it kinda makes you want to pull that extra $20 to $30 and go for its bigger brother. Then again, the RX 5700 XT isn't that far from the RX 5700 either, so you're in this never-ending loop of reaching out to your pocket for more. Bottom line, they're pulling an Nvidia on you with this one. But you know what, I really cannot complain. I think we have a lot of options to choose from around this mainstream segment together with it. So in the end, it's up to you to decide what you're going to go for based on the information I showed you here and your personal preferences. That's it for this time for me. Thank you once again for watching. Please take a second to toss me a thumbs up if you enjoyed my content. That really helps a lot. And if you like what you saw, feel free to subscribe, and if you already are, be sure to press that notification bell down below so you don't miss out on a new video. And until then, catch you later, guys.